Hello, and welcome to the Solitaire the Gathering podcast. We focus on no land-based combo strategies, specifically Belcher and Oops All Spells. We do dabble into other combo decks from time to time, so today we're going to be talking about Belcher specifically. I am Riker, also known as Dredge the Bet on the internet, tuning in from the United States. Joining me are my wonderful co-hosts and even better pilots, Bob and Sam. Fortunately, Sharif can't be with us today, but he will be tuning in our next episode. And let's go ahead and introduce ourselves, guys. Let's start with you, Sam.
Hey, how are you guys? Sam, also known as Ashanti. Playing mostly Oops All Spells and Belcher, of course.
Hello, I'm Robert, also known as Bob49. I'm tuning in from Austria. I'm also very good at Belcher, and I've recently played in the MOCS, and this will also be a topic of conversation.
For sure. Today we are going to start with our MOCS conversation. Our very own Bob, the people's champion of the Belcher Discord, participated in the MOCS, a very large and super competitive event. For those who don't know what the MOCS is, the MOCS is a MTGO online showcase. You can qualify for it by participating in specific MTGO events or Magic Online events, and you can earn MOCS points, and that gets you into the MOCS. Bob was one of the players that got enough MOCS points to participate, and the formats that are played are, correct me if I'm wrong, Vintage, Cube, and Modern?
That is correct.
All right. And Bob did bring Belcher to the Modern segment, and we were going to talk a little bit with him about his results, how he felt that it played out. If you did see any of the MOCS lists, it was very tuned to anti-Belcher. People expected Bob to bring Belcher, and people were scared of Bob on Belcher. And how do you feel those matchups went, Bob?
All right, so let's start off with the results. In total, I've got 4th place with a 3-3. I went 2-1 in Vintage Cube and 1-2 in Modern. So I played Belcher in Modern. My matchups were Red-White Prowess against the one player that was not prepared for Belcher. Then I played against Death Shadow, against Nathan Steyer, the one who won this event. And I played against Blue-Black Mill, against the player who was very, very much prepared against Belcher.
I think something to note is that the Grixis Shadowless and the Millis both had Mind Grind in the sideboard.
Yes, that was part of their preparation for this deck, and I never saw it, but it was certainly something I was very afraid of in that match. So let's start off with how the first match went. I played against Prowess. In the first match, I kept a turn 3 recross hand that would win on turn 4. Generally, that's not something you want to keep against Prowess because it's fairly slow. But I mulliganed to 4, I think, and just having 3 lands and the recross the paths was the best I was going to get. Luckily, this was still enough. I went to 1 life, I think, but I still got there. And in game 2, I just had a turn 3 kill with Ironcrag Feet and Belcher. The interesting part was in game 1, where I had recross the paths. I wanted to create a pile from 3 lands that would have that one would play around Ragavan, because I knew that he played that. And it would have Pact of Negation in the pile to counter a bolt from the wheel, because I would need to bolt myself for the in order to get there with the lands, because I had red, green, green as lands. So I would have to play Shatterskull untapped either way. And since I was going to go to 1 life, any bolt from a wheel would kill me, so I needed a Pact of Negation at any point. So I solved this by having 2 Reforge the souls on top, so no matter if I get Ragavan or not, I get there. If the top Reforge gets exiled, the next 7 cards get me into a pile with 2 Desperate Rituals, Belcher and Pact of Negation. So I would get to combo out that way. But Belcher was the, in total, 9th card off the top. So if my opponent does not play Ragavan, I do not get the Belcher. But I get to use the Desperate Rituals to get to 7 mana and cast a second Reforge the Soul, which gets me into a new pile of 7 cards, which also makes enough mana to cast Belcher and have a second Pact of Negation. So that was a kind of interesting pile.
This is huge science from Bob, man. I think, and just listening to Bob's, like, it's an experience, right? It's really has to do not only with the experience and understanding of the deck, but also like these angle cases that are not going to show up a lot, and that's why you are not going to find like specific recross piles for every single different situation that we have. But this is just has to do with the creativity that Bob has when he's playing the deck. So, of course, my respect for Bob, and congratulations for the results.
I think a big thing to mention on the recross pass in specific is that to most people who aren't super familiar with Belcher, they usually think there's like 3 or 4 piles that you just go with every time, and you just which pile is correct for this situation. And this right here with Bob and the MOCS is proof that that's not always the case. There's so many nuances of stacking your deck, all the different possibilities you can do. And that's one of the things I find really interesting about the deck is that it plays the same almost every game, but there's different ways of doing it every game. You're achieving the same goal, but it sometimes takes a lot to get to it.
But I agree that there's maybe 3 to 4 piles that you use 70% of the time, and then 30% of the time you just have to come up with something. That's particularly relevant because you often just draw some of your cards, and then you just have to come up with a solution. However, I think that this specific pile is something that has been coming up more and more for me, because this is just a pile you do when you have 3 lands and you want to play around Ragavan and something that you can Pact of Negation. And that's actually not that uncommon.
I'm glad you actually shared that pile with me, because I've had instances like that against Burn specifically, where you need the Pact, but sometimes they could have Ragavan. Just any deck that plays direct damage that plays Ragavan. And in the past, I didn't think of putting in a second Reforge to cast with the rituals, or doing a second Reforge pile underneath. I've always done the double Reforge, do my normal pile, and then put a Pact there so that if I do get hit with the Ragavan, I have the Pact as well. And of course, that line can work, but it's a lot sloppier than doing the double Reforge.
Yes, I think this is the optimal line for this situation.
With the MOCS, was there, and me, Sharif, and Sam did watch your matches when we could, and we were commentating, seeing what could be done. We don't think there was really any lines you could have taken differently from what we were seeing, but we were wondering if there was any lines that you wish you would have done differently.
I think the one you could watch was the one against Shadow, right?
Correct.
I don't think so. I didn't watch them again, so I could only see it from my perspective. It seemed like I had no real chance in that match, but I just played to the best of my ability and just played what I could.
When you say you didn't have a chance, it was because, from what we saw, it was because of your draws, right? Like Belcher does stand a chance against Shadow, but the hands you were given there were just not great.
The matchup is winnable. I would say it's definitely below 50%, but it can be won. But my draw, or I would rather say my opponent's draws were good enough to deal with my draws. I don't think my draws were particularly terrible. But my opponents just were pretty good. And also the player was very good. So they certainly deserved their victory there.
As we were looking at the meta, and I know this is a question you probably don't like, but if you saw what the matchups were going to be, would you have definitely brought a different deck?
Yes.
And what would that deck have been?
I don't know anything else. No, I mean, going in, I expected there to be some hate for Belcher because people knew I was going to play this. And I thought that I play this deck well enough that some hate is just fine, even above average, even significantly above average hate is fine. But people brought a lot of hate for Belcher, and I just didn't expect quite as much. I expected some things like Death Shadow having extra Kolaghan's commands or extra Spell Pierces in the main deck, and maybe someone picking Mill to bring to the MOCS because of this, and they did those things, but then they also played Mind Grind. And some other people also brought some other tech, like I think Canister brought extra Piffin Needles and brought the playset of Boseijus. And I did expect people to play the playset of their Boseijus, but then they also brought specific hate cards for this matchup. And that was just too much. What other deck I would have played, I'm not sure. I've tested a couple of other decks like E-Tron or Tron. I've also tried Amulet, and I'm pretty good at Amulet, so I think that was an option. But I think Amulet just wouldn't have fundamentally been a better deck to play against these, because it still has a below average Shadow matchup, it still loses to Mill, it still beats Prowess. So there is nothing really gained by playing Amulet here.
I agree. I do like that this MOCS kind of showcased that Belcher is a scary deck and will beat you if you're not prepared for it. And people came with extra protection for that matchup because you can just lose to it like that. I was kind of joking with Sam and Sharif after we were looking over the lists, but Oops, all spells look like it would have probably done really well in that MOCS. Sam was reviewing the list.
I was really hyped in playing like Oops all spells. I know that Bob. I knew that I won't be able to convince Bob to play Oops all spells. Still, I have a much better win rate against Death Shadow with Oops all spells, just because like. Of course, hand disruption is it's bad for either both of the decks. They can like discard anything that we have in our hand, but drown is like practically not. It can't counter any of the rogues that we play. Like Oops all spells doesn't fill their graveyard until they go off. So this is something really important. They can like Thought Size one and Inquisitions another card. Then we have like 2 cards in our graveyard, but they still need at least 3 cards to like counter our intruder. So this is something like relevant from in my perspective. Spell Pierce and all the other like traditional counters normally don't have effect against Oops all spells. The only one is like the through counter spells by itself. So I think that's something that I would have played because again I'm the Oops player, so I like to play Oops all spells of course, but trying to be like very objective in the meta that was presented. A Mill would have been very, very, very difficult to beat. I don't think that I would have any chance with 4 surgicals. That's something like really, really mean. But having in mind the other players, if you dodge mill, then there would be a pretty nice possibility to win that.
I do like Oops versus Shadow a lot more than I like Belcher versus Shadow. When you look at Oops versus a Shadow board, Inquisition doesn't hit half of our spies. Spell Pierce doesn't counter the spies. Drown in the Lock is almost never going to counter our rocks or our spies. And when it comes to great sideboarding, a lot of them are on Nihil Spellbomb, and you're bringing in Leylines for this. Leyline stops Nihil Spellbomb. I think Oops could be a meta check for Shadow, but of course, Oops loses to itself a lot too.
Yeah, totally. And also the good thing perhaps is that, if they don't dot size us, Inquisition also doesn't hit a lot of the lands that usually Death Shadow can hit versus Belcher. So that's something another protection that we have. But again, you need to really draw really hard in those events. Variance in Upsal spells is high. I won't deny that. So it's having in mind only one Hammer Time player. I was even thinking not playing Thassa Oracle and just playing much more mana rocks, more lands to have the consistency that we need for turn 3.
Mm-hmm.
So but that's only an opinion. It's pretty easy to give an opinion now that we have all the information. But still, it would have been nice to see Upsal spells.
Mm-hmm. So I didn't consider Upsal spells beforehand. My thought process going into this was that Belcher is the deck I'm the best at. So the consideration was to either pick Belcher where I'm good at it but is bad in the meta, or to just pick something that's good against the meta that I expect the others to bring. I expected others to bring Death Shadow and Blink. But obviously if I just pick a deck, then I will not be the best at it. And in the end, I ran out of time to find this deck, so I just picked the deck I'm good at.
Were you surprised to not see any Murktide in the MOCS?
Not that surprised. I would have expected people that were considering Murktide to just play Death Shadow. And they did.
Yeah, and they won. They got first and second, exact same list. Okay, moving.
Yeah.
Anybody have any thoughts on the MOCS while we're still here?
I think GDS is just the best deck right now in the meta. I wasn't surprised at all. We all know I'm not somebody that really likes to request bans because I'm not this type of the guy. I received a lot of bans to my decks because I like to play unfair decks, and I think the same thing happens to you guys too. So it's not a discussion about what needs to be banned or not. But what I do think is right now, with all the resources and all the cards that we right now have, playing Lurus, playing Ragavan, and some other spells is the best thing that you can do right now.
Mm-hmm. Rest in peace, Simian Spirit Guide.
Yes, I certainly think that Death Shadow is currently the best deck, and I wouldn't be sad if Lurus got banned, but I also don't think it's that necessary.
And this might be me thinking out loud, but I think a Mishra's Bauble ban would hurt Shadow enough to make it more equal with the rest of the meta. I think Bauble's had its time, but Bauble plus Lurus plus now Darcy enables a lot.
The thing is, I understand it does too much things for 0 mana. So we agree on that. 0 mana, you have an artifact in play, you draw a card, You can like basically see a card also one from wherever you want to. Like it does too much. It does too much for 0 mana. But I also think that it's not enough. Like from this perspective, like a combo player, we don't really care about the interaction like other players have. So we just do our thing. If you have it, then you have it. If you don't have it, you will probably lose against us. So that's not something that I'm like, my opinion is only about that. But what I do think about the ban of Babel is there are other things. And I was listening. I was listening to some thoughts that Doomwake was giving out like last week, and listening also to other players that were expressing their opinions on Twitter. Like everybody like are like having the same opinion regarding what Lurrus can do for us and what he can't do for us. So that being said, again, I really don't want to talk about what needs to be banned or not. But what I do think would be really nice in Modern is that if we can have a refresh, and we need to find a refresh so that the meta shifts a little bit more. We get very hyped with Buseju. After that, we see that it doesn't do something like necessary. We were like saying, okay, Hammer Time is going to be out now. And it's not like that. Like Hammer Time even got some tools from Dion Dynasty. Everything that we're like having like, we had some expectations, didn't really happen. So I do think that we need some kind of shifting by the organizer itself. If not, the meta will stay the same.
I do think that the meta right now is still in a very healthy spot. It's just settling down to some decks are really standing out and they've stuck around. Like Hammer has been tier 1 for maybe a year now, maybe more. It's been very good for a while now. We will definitely dive into meta discussions and Neon Dynasty cards when we record our episode with Sharif soon. So we'll definitely dive more into this topic. I'm going to move us on to, we would like to answer some of the questions that we have received in our Discord. And I'm going to start with our first question. This one's directed at our lovely friend Bob here. And it reads, I'd love to hear Bob49 talking about the mirror match. It can be wild sometimes, and it's probably the kind of puzzle that he enjoys. So I'm going to hand this one off to Bob. Let's see what he has to say about it, and then me and Sam can give our thoughts in after.
So first of all, yes, it is the kind of puzzle I enjoy. The mirror match is on the one hand maybe the most interesting matchup for Belcher, and on the other hand, it can also be a bit boring. Because sometimes one player just has a faster hand and it's over very quickly. And generally the matchup is decided by whoever gets their combo first.
Right, there's the Iron Crag mirrors and then there's the Recross mirror. Exactly.
In general, your Belchers are slightly faster than your Recrosses. So if one player gets the Belcher start, usually that player wins. On the other hand, post-board, Leyline of Sanctity can host the Belcher win con, so post-board the Recross win con gets better. The interesting part in the mirror is when both players have recrossed the paths, because one player can cast the recrossed paths, try to set up a win, but the second player, generally the player on the draw, can use the turn after the first player recrossed to cast their own recrossed paths, and then use the wheel that that the first player is setting up to wheel into Pact of Negation and the rituals to pay for this Pact of Negation. While the first player can play around this a little bit, they also need to create a pile that wins immediately because they cannot lose time Otherwise, the second player would win via Belcher, for example. So the second player obviously has some information advantage because they know that the first player is going for a recross win con. So this is a very interesting minigame because both players have absolute information after both recrosses have been cast. They all know what they are going to top deck, and you have to do a lot of mind games and think about what your opponent is setting up and set your recross up according to that.
Yeah, I'm if I go into a Belcher mirror, I don't really enjoy it personally because it goes two ways, as Bob was talking about. Either one person goes ritual Ironcrag, I win, or one person goes recross the pass and the other person goes, okay, recross the pass also. And then you get into this weird mind game situation where you're like, no, it's painful for sure.
But that's the
play
best.
That match.
The recross mirror is just the best.
It takes a lot of thought process from each side. See, I more like the Oops All Spells mirror, where one person goes, I win, and the other person's like, fair enough. That's the mirror every time. It's like, there's really no thought process to it. It's, I won the die roll, GG. GG.
You can still play silence in between. It's not the other one.
Silence.
Yeah, so what I think about the Miro, I recently, twice, two times the Miro. And I played against a very experienced player and then versus somebody that hasn't, not experienced. It was clearly, set up by the decisions that he was making. And the problem for me is me considering an experienced player and not knowing how's the mind of the other one. I was playing around a lot of stuff, trying to think about, I think I need to do that and that and that and that. And then the result was that perhaps I was waiting for the other player to do something so that I can react with my Pact of Negation. Afterwards, play a bunch of rituals and then mana morphos to pay the Pact of Negation. And it was okay, it wasn't really necessary. So it really depends. Versus the other player that had a lot of experience, he was digging, I think it was 27 or 30 cards with March, and he was looking for a force of vigor to stop my PA loop. And I had a lot of luck because he didn't found it, but still. And what I think it's interesting because it really takes you to a next level of thinking. Still very tricky. If you're kind of tired, then I really recommend you to dodge the matchup if you can. But still, it's fun. It's interesting. It's interesting. It's really like a chess game.
We do have two more questions here that we can take a crack at. I think I can combine both of these. This is going to be really interesting because one is pointed at Belcher and one is pointed at Oops All Spells. And we have Sam, who's really good with Oops All Spells, and Bob, that is really good with Belcher. And I'm just kind of this mediator. I play both. So let's see how we can get this rolling. We have the question, what about a Belcher basics / mulligan lesson? What constitutes a keepable hand in game one when all you've seen is your opponent's companion or lack of companion? Specifically, I've been wondering if a turn 3 recross is too slow in game one, especially on the draw. But mulligans are such an important part of the combo that I would be interested to hear a longer discussion on that. And to go along with that, we have another one that says, I think the same thing for Oops would be good. Oops even more than Belcher, since a lot of your actual decisions are just in mulligans. You have no card draw / advantage, where Belcher you have Morphos, Valakut Awakening, obviously recross, and now we have March of Reckless Joy on top of that in some lists. So let's start with the Belcher side of mulligans, and I'm going to pass this one off to you, Bob.
All right. So fundamentally, you want a hand with Belcher or recross the paths. You are willing to go fairly low. I think you can accept mulliganing to 5, sometimes mulliganing to 4 if your 5 is bad. To achieve that, if you don't know what your opponent is playing, turn 3 recross the paths on the draw is still fine. If you know your opponent is playing something fast, like burn, you have to mulligan those. But if you don't know the matchup, you are probably fine just keeping a rather slow hand with the turn 3 recross on the draw. With March of Reckless Joy, you can also keep March hands, especially on low mulligans. But that is still difficult to know which particular hand you want to keep with March of Reckless Joy, and we're still experimenting a lot with it.
Would you keep a hand that doesn't have a Belcher or recross in it if it, say, has 2 Spike-Filled Hazards and your opponent has shown you a Luris as their companion?
No.
Gotcha.
I think if you... No, I don't think under any circumstances that's a keep. There are some matchups where you don't have to keep a Belcher or recross, particularly. You can sometimes keep Valakut Awakening hands if your opponent reveals Yorion, because then you have time to just filter through your draws until you hit Belcher or recross. Same applies to Kahira, because then your opponent is either on Elementals or Control, and then you can take your time to find your win con. This is particularly interesting since Belcher could also play Kahira, and this is also a trick that one can use.
Oh no, not the mirror again. I'm already haunted by it. I've kept some hands without a win con, but have had a March of Reckless Joy in it, and they've paid off sometimes. I think if you can produce a lot of mana, March can be a pseudo win con if it shows the correct things.
Yes, March is often keepable, but it depends on the exact hand, on the exact matchup, and a bit on your luck.
All right, let's roll it around to our sister deck, Oops All Spells, and keeping hands there. And from what I've played with Oops, it does feel pretty straightforward. You need a win con, 2 lands, and a mana rock. That's like the bare minimum. But depending on matchup knowledge, what hands do you think could be keepable and could not be keepable, Sam?
Okay, so what you're saying is totally correct, Riker. I think that Oops All Spells, in a kind way, needs to mulligan much aggressively. So you really want to have your rogue, you really want to have a rock and 2 lands, with the wish that you draw a third one if you have like a talisman. If you have Phantom Prism, of course, it's totally enough to have 2 lands and the rogue. So in my perspective, you need to mulligan always for that. If I see a Lurus, then that's even like, it indicates me even more that the matchup is practically being very fast. Like opponent is probably playing Hammer Time, Grixis Shadow, or Burn. So I wouldn't keep hands with a spy in 4 lands and with no rock if I saw Lyros, because then you will probably lose. By the other side, when I play against, and I'm not going to do any like Cyborg guys or something like that, but if you have Leyline of Sancticity, for example, against some kind of discards, let's say like Grixis Shadow, and you have no like payoff, no rock, no Belcher, I keep those hands actually.
I do as well. I've kept a 2-card hand against Burn. It was a Leyline and 1 land with Oops, and I ended up getting there. You have to trust in your draws, but I think Leyline on its own is enough to give you a lot of time.
Totally, because and coming back to Grixis Shadow, you won't fill up your graveyard, so you are like pretty much protected. They need to like put a lot of threats in order to like make you sweat a lot, and this is something that normally doesn't happen until turn 4 or 5. So you have a bunch of draws that can be a result of a winning. So I normally keep hands that have Leyline of Sancticity against Jaunt, Grixis Shadow, or Burn without the Rogue, and you're fine. But if we are playing, let's say, against Hammer Time, then I would really move for a payoff like a Rogue in order to combo off. They will normally put a lot of pressure, but you still have the way to win with Thassa Oracle. So when we're coming back to the decisions of should I mulligan or not, pay a lot of attention which companion is being revealed, and with this information you should be able to make better decisions, at least when you need to decide if you want to keep them or not.
I just had a revelation of something. So I'm thinking of some questions to ask you guys, and the one that's on my mind is card selection and the respective decks for Bob, Belcher, for Sam, Oops All Spells. And the revelation I just had here was I'm thinking of putting Moonstare Prototype in Oops All Spells because it can tap your other artifacts for mana, but it's bizarre here, but I'm just thinking turn 1 Moonsnare Prototype, turn 2 Pentad Prism with another land, you win on turn 2. Right?
But you already win if you have Pentad Prism, right?
No, yeah. I did that math wrong because you have to invest 2 mana. I like Moonsnare Prototype, and I've been trying to abuse it as much as I can.
It's a good card.
It's a nice card. I'm not playing it in Oops, but I'm playing it in Lantern Control. That's like my dark side.
You're disgusting.
Yeah, I know. So I'm not going to reveal that. I already revealed it right now in this podcast, but
I've also played this for a while.
So it's the only deck of Control that I really play. If not, I only play like combo decks. So guys,
it's okay.
Let's keep the discussion on the combo decks.
Okay, back to the combo. So I'm gonna keep testing Moonsnare Prototype. I'm gonna make it work in Oops. Just you wait. I'm gonna try, but
okay.
I'm gonna try. Okay, that's the thought that counts. You just gotta try it. For Bob,
sorry again, but
you're good. Keep going.
You need, it's blue, right? It's 1 blue.
It's 1 blue.
So it's really hard to cast it. You really need to have Seagate Restoration. It's the only. I wouldn't like pay with 1 mana of my Pentad Prism to play it. So that's the point that I like kind of see difficult. Or you need to change the mana base in order to play that. I don't know if it's really worthy.
Yeah, we could, I could try taking a crack at Selected Memory Belcher again if I want to do Moonsnare Prototype.
Oh, okay.
That's more blue-based. I could try that.
Show us the list and we'll talk about it next time.
Definitely. Probably not, but we'll see. For Bob, card selection in Belcher, is March of Reckless Joy something you want in your Belcher list? And if so or not, why?
I'm still not sure. So in the MOCS, I didn't register March of Reckless Joy. My line of thinking was that if after all this testing, I still haven't found out if it's optimal or not, we'll just assume for now that it's not optimal. I have since played 1 instead of the main deck Pyromancer's Ascension, which I moved to the sideboard. But for the MOCS, I wanted the Pyromancer Ascension in the main deck because I expected some form of hate to be present, particularly things like Piffing Needle if someone registers Jund Saga, and then I wanted Pyromancer Ascension in the main deck.
I'm too attached to Pyromancer's Ascension. I always have to keep it in the main. It's a safety thing for me.
Yes, I mean, it's also, there are certain arguments for it. Like if you're playing against Tron, you just need it to win game one. But I haven't faced that much Tron recently, so I thought it might be worth it to just cut it. So I've been trying one March of Reckless Joy in the main deck instead of the Pyromancer's Ascension. It's completely fine to play it. If you have no idea what you want to run in your last couple slots, then March is totally fine. I'm not sure if it's worth it to replace Pact of Negations or maybe Blood Moons if you play those over it. We'll certainly need to test it even more.
I've been testing it, and again, I would just say take out your Songmat Treachery and put March in. I'm so down for going down one land. I'm super greedy like that, and it's paid off. March has won me games, and I've had my opponents be like, "That card's broken." And I'm like, it's okay. The thing with March is that March is a random effect. We're never certain that we're going to win once we cast it, and that's kind of the trend with a lot of Belcher stuff, is when you cast a Belcher, you're going to win very soon. When you cast a Recross, you're going to win very soon.
Yes, I prefer to rely on the Mulligan to find me the cards I need rather than any card selection after that.
Yeah, I mean it's random, but we also like when we talk about card draw, we do it with Valakut Awakening, and that's something super random also. And we put like 4 or 5 cards, and we draw a lot of 5 cards again, without having any knowledge. I agree that we are still not like normally. We all 4 agree in how many cards we need to play about one card, and we still don't know. Some are playing 3. Bob is now trying 1. I'm still sticking on 2. I'm
on 2 as well.
I don't think like 3. It's like it seems like a lot, and 1 seems to me like only like a card that I can use in a Reforge pile or in a Recross pile. Sorry. So I don't know. I wouldn't take out also Pyromancer Assumption. Like with all the like affinity decks that are right now. Pithing Needle is being like online again in a lot of main decks, so
needles everywhere.
Yeah, so I'm like trying to be like very careful with that. I do understand that leagues are different than important events, but everything and that's something that I also always want to remark, because a lot of people talk about and ask to us again and again, so which is your deck list and what is the like stock? I don't think there is any stock list. If you're playing 4 Belcher and 4 Recross and a mana base that is decent, then anything else really doesn't matter. Also, it's totally different to play in leagues, in stores, where you already know your opponents, where you already know which is the meta game that normally won't be shifting so much than in Magic Online. So all these considerations is you don't need to take an exact list that we are playing right now into a local store, because you might have already a lot of knowledge that you want to put inside of the 75 cards. So this is a recommendation that I wanted to give you all.
All right, we're closing up here. This is going to be a shorter episode. We do have a lot more coming in our next episode, which should be an hour-long episode, like some spicy lists that don't play lands. I can say the name, but Tamashi has been running amok in the Discord for a while.
I just wanted to point out 2 cards in Uppsala Spells that I'm being testing. Like I kind of want to stay on white, so this is something that I was like thinking of which are the other cards that might be relevant. So we're already playing Prismatic Ending, we're playing Silence. I'm trying a couple of Fragmentize. That's a sorcery for 1 white mana that destroys an artifact or enchantment of a mana value of 4 or less. So it also hits like Leyline of the Void. That's not being played a lot, but it's really good. against Hammer Time and some of the decks that already are online in the meta. So I recommend like trying to play Fragmentize. And my new pet card that I am trying out is...
Let me guess. Deafening Silence?
Yes, Deafening Silence, man. It's great. It really stops people from connecting spells. And right now we are in a meta where everybody's trying to connect spells. And it doesn't like hit ourselves because we at least play only Memory Journey. Memory Journey and Thassa Oracle like the only non-creative spells that we normally do, or perhaps the Talisman is something else. But I recommend you to try it. Just try it out. Try it out and see by yourself. I will assure you that it will give you some wins.
Okay, we will definitely give more depth to this as well. This is towards the end of episode 2. Or 1.5. It's not really the full length that we expected, but we did want to get in a full episode when Sharif was around. I think I'm going to sign us off here unless anybody had some other thoughts they'd want to share real quick. Alright, that's a negative from my team. I am Riker, also known as Dredge the Bed. I'm glad to be here and to discuss some Belcher with you guys, and I will see you in the next episode.
See ya!
See you guys. Ashanti, also, well, Sam in the real world. Thank you very much for listening.
Bob doesn't need no introduction. We all know who he is.
Everyone knows who I am.
All right.
Keep belching.
We'll catch you guys in the next episode.